Croeso, welcome to Leeway Productions podcast 10-Minute Musicals.
A haven for discussions of artistic collaboration and Welsh musical theatre's ever-growing landscape. I am your host, Luke Hereford, whose many talents include being capable of talking for Wales.
And I am Angharad Lee, whose many talents include listening to Luke talking for Wales.
And we are your co-hosts. That's all right. I thought we'd do much worse than that.
We tried it. We will better it next time, Luke.
Absolutely. You'll have to tune in next week to find out if we can speak in unison better than we have this week. So today we are interviewing Peter Cox and Matthew Holmquist, who wrote the 10-minute musical Circles of the Moon. This 10-minute musical premiered at the Other Room in Cardiff during 10-minute musical's second phase, which was all the way back in January 2017. Do you remember those days, Angharad?
Many moons ago. I have a beard now.
You've aged gracefully, though.
Yes.
And Peter and Matthew both have a very broad pair of CVs between them. Peter is a playwright, a screenwriter, and dramaturg, amongst many other things. And Matthew is a director, sound designer, and musician and composer. And together they have created a beautifully unique piece in Circles of the Moon. And I'm really looking forward to them talking more about it, aren't you, Angharad?
Yes, hugely so. I'm just really looking forward to the development of this piece and the development of ideas, I think, around it.
Absolutely. And you have known Peter for quite some time, is that right?
Yes, I think I first met Peter back in 2006 when we were working on Amazing Grace. It was the second time Amazing Grace had come around, which is a musical created by Mal Pope and Frank Vickery, I think, in its initial phase. And then when it came back, it needed some sprucing up. And Peter came and reinvigorated it. I think he worked as dramaturg and writer on it again. I'm hoping he may correct me if I've got that wrong. I was a young actress at the time. So yeah, we go back quite a long way. And then I was reintroduced to Peter when he wanted to come and do a 10-minute musical, which was amazing, which was great.
Well, no time like the present to introduce Peter Cox and Matthew Holmquist. Good morning, both of you. Where are you joining us from?
I'm coming from Cardiff. Hi, Matthew Holmquist here. Yeah, and I'll pass over to Peter.
I'm joining from a place called Nantglas, which is just south of Breda in mid-Powys.
Oh, nice. Great. So we're full Welsh house here today. Lovely. How are we all doing in this strange time for all of us as artists?
Yeah, I think I'm coping, I would say, on the whole, okay. Obviously, they're kind of good days and bad days, but I think I've kind of found a routine which is kind of keeping me sane. It's probably the best way to describe it. I don't know about you, Peter.
Yeah, the same, really. I'm kind of seeing the good days, bad days as kind of good 10 days, bad 10 days type, more than a day. Mainly picking up a huge amount of mental health issues in our sector, in our industry, and as a kind of very experienced professional in the industry, I'm trying to be as supportive as possible for people. But I do think it's an extremely difficult time, especially for young people coming out of education into our sector.
Absolutely.
And so acting as a mentor in those situations, you also then have to step back and kind of rebuild your own resources as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about self-love at the time. Like at this time, I mean, and sort of however that manifests itself in our own individual bubbles, I think it's really good not to put too much pressure on ourselves. So good to hear that you're both doing fairly well. But let's just dive straight into talking about your piece, Circles of the Moon. So I was actually working on 10-minute musicals when you guys first worked together and first wrote this piece. And it takes some of its initial inspiration from existing folklore, I believe. How did that come about? If you guys want to just talk a little more about just how the idea of Circles of the Moon first manifested itself.
If I start on that, I think the kind of core trigger for it came out of the initial day of workshop exercises that we did, in which we were given objects to respond to and pictures to respond to. But actually the core of where it came from is sort of built into the process. And that is the fact that we're just introduced to each other as random people who've never met each other before, never mind worked with each other before, or thought, oh, here's the guy called Matthew, I must track him down and try and work with him. So the catalyst for it, in a way, comes out of that kind of the way that Leeway have built that into the process, which is it's random, and you're going to come together, and we're going to make something out of the two of your brains to begin with, and so from there it built into responses to the images, responses to the objects, and we wanted to go into somewhere darker with it. I just felt inspired to go somewhere darker with it than somewhere light and fluffy with it.
Yeah, and then we kind of, I guess we kind of explored the exercises, and I remember specifically there was one of the images that I think kicked it all off for us was the plague mask, which now obviously feels slightly weirdly pertinent. But yeah, the plague mask kind of started off, and similar to Peter, actually, I think this was the first time I'd ever tried to compose a musical. I'd kind of written music by myself for a long time, but not really been willing or brave enough to kind of put it out into the world. And to be able to get put with someone like Peter, who's obviously a very experienced writer, was great. And similarly, I also wanted to was really interested in going to somewhere darker, just because I think I'm a massive musical theatre fan, but the musicals that always I think grab me and really stimulate me are the ones where they explore something which is a kind of something a bit darker, and kind of subverts this idea that obviously all musical theatre is your kind of like mega musicals, and that there's no kind of real I guess like intellectual like investigation of like the characters and of things in life which are slightly darker. So your musicals like Assassins and Sweeney Todd and things where the characters are definitely not your archetype kind of hero villain, that they're more complicated than that. And I think what we wanted to do was really just to explore that, really.
It's great for me to hear that this is your first stab at trying to write for a musical, because I know you, Matt, as a director, and I've come across this constantly. We all do it. We box people, don't we? And we go, oh, that person's this, that. So to this kind of lab feel just allows everybody's skill set to flourish, and you learn so much about an individual. So it's lovely and reassuring that this is a kickstart for something, But I know, Peter's, you have a huge history of playwriting and TV drama. Just wondering, what is your experience of writing for musical theatre, and how does this project maybe build on that?
That's a really interesting question. Many years ago, in my first sort of 10 years as a playwright, my instinct was always to write with song in the show in one way or another. And there were certain circumstances where it was almost expected. So they were more like plays with songs. And for example, working with 784 Theatre Company, which would be touring the UK in miners' welfare halls, just different types of venues which are very much non-theatre venues. The way the songs worked in the show is that they kind of brought slightly more of a cabaret feel to the plays that we were working on. It was a bit more like going to a variety night at a working men's club, where you might get some comic stuff, you might get some acts of different kinds, including quite a lot of music. So my instinct was there from very early on, and I deliberately tried on a number of occasions with Arts Council England at the time to get grants to work on pieces which were very much based in that kind of musical theatre area. And it was really problematic. They basically would take us through this kind of argument, which was, oh right, so this needs to go to our music department. And you'd say, well, no, because it's theatre. And then if you took it to the music department, they would say, no, this is theatre, this isn't music. And it became quite dispiriting after a while that there was a real disconnect between what musical theatre is as an art form and the fact that it seems to be something different from theatre. They couldn't kind of get their heads around this for a long time. So regardless of that, I pursued my career then, which it included some very, very large-scale community plays with a cast of 125, or youth theatre shows with a cast of 40. And in all of those pieces, there was always song material of one kind or another. And so by the time I was kind of in the 2000s, Michael Bogdanov came along with the request of me to write the book for Amazing Grace, and it then went on a very successful tour. And I learned a lot from that, but I also gave a lot to that process. And it reinforced and reinvigorated my desire to try and communicate to musical theatre as a form, which I think is often misrepresented and often misunderstood. So when I worked with Anne Carrot in the first instance on Amazing Grace, it was to be in the Millennium Centre in Cardiff with a 2,000-seater full house, sold out, and have the audience on their feet for your work at the end of it is fantastic feeling. But it also, you know that your audience are taking things away into their lives which they wouldn't be taken away from a play that hadn't included music. They take away something very different. It's a kind of added value thing as well. And music is such a working through lyric and music is such a pure and distilled form that you can encapsulate vast themes and huge influences within two lines. You have to turn on the sixpence with it, really. So it's something that's always been there. It's something I continue to do, but I would never want to try and be a kind of copycat, make it a copycat exercise. You know, I often will go and listen to a jukebox musical soundtrack just to see what they've done with it to make it different. And in most cases, nobody's done anything different. They're often just doing the same old thing, which is a bit of a tried and tested formula. And I've never wanted to be a tried and tested formula writer. So that's kind of my approach to it, really.
It's really interesting to hear that kind of broad range of influences that have brought you around to this 10-minute musical project, and kind of what you brought to that initial first day when you two were working together. Just kind of going back to something that Matthew said about exploring those darker themes and wanting to investigate those themes and ideas further in musicals. What are the challenges of doing that in a 10-minute musical? So in a smaller time frame, what did you guys find challenging?
That's a good question. I don't know whether maybe, Peter, if I take music and you take words. I guess from my perspective, in terms of the music, trying to convey those kind of dark themes, obviously there's a lot of work I can do in terms of creating the atmosphere. And this is one of the positives and benefits of how, you know, the 10-minute musical kind of formula works, where we were obviously given two singers, and by pure chance we were given a musical theatre tenor, Gwydion Rees, and a opera soprano, Megan Llewellyn, which obviously immediately then pushed me to respond to what their voices were like. And I guess having the kind of the broad range for Megan in terms of the epicness of her voice, and having I don't know, I guess Megan is an incredible singer, and she has such kind of, I guess, like earthiness to her. Like, it's not, you know, it's a really powerful voice, and immediately I kind of knew that pairing that kind of voice with Gwydion's, which is much sweeter and I would say a kind of more a sweeter voice, that we already had a really interesting juxtaposition of tones, and that what I would want to try and do is try and match that in the orchestration, so that, again, trying to pair the piano with the cello was, again, trying to find that kind of double, that kind of the cello again being a really grounded, kind of earthy kind of tone, to the piano, which, you know, is slightly more, I guess, has slightly more range to it, but in terms of the tones you can get from it. But again, I think it was always about always trying to find the kind of two sides of everything. So like the characters having, you know, Kairos's character initially being very apprehensive in the story, and then I guess him finding his strength, and then Morrigan's character initially having that kind of power and drive, and then finding what's the kind of the sensitivity within that. And I was trying to do that musically, kind of with the style of the songs, in terms of one of them being a kind of a really like an anthem for Morrigan, and then for Kairos's introduction it was more of something a bit more atmospheric and a bit more sensitive, and then for the end the duet again starting from a place of kind of beauty and simplicity, and then kind of growing to something kind of unified. So I tried musically to kind of, I guess, to try and create that darkness and nuance, which, you know, was a lot easier because of Peter's wonderful words, which I'm sure he will then go on to talk about.
I'm glad you've brought up, you know, Gwydion and Megan's involvement, because I don't think we've touched upon this much yet, Luke, in the podcasts, in that we bring the performers in quite early, and that they very much become collaborators. You know, they're not brought in right at the end just to sing the stuff. And this is very much about those transferable skills and investigating structures. You know, we're so guided by structures in the arts. This is something we're talking about a lot at the moment, isn't it? Because we're shackled by the structure. We can't work at the moment because of it. So this whole lab feel has really investigated that. And this musical, or this piece, I don't even want to call it a musical. We don't know yet, do we? It's again, you don't want to be labeling, but it was such a truly collaborative process between the four of you, and it was beautiful to watch.
Totally. And all those songs, you know, the first one, which is Kairos's one, I think with all of them I kind of started from a place of going, okay, this is an initial idea, you know, and worked with Gwydion on the first one, and we, you know, I would kind of say maybe it goes this way, and then he would talk about where he felt his voice wanted to go, and then similar for Megan with the second one, you know, and all of those were also all written in different locations as well, weirdly. So I wrote the duet, the Megan song, in Welsh National Opera's one of their rehearsal rooms, which felt quite kind of weirdly poetic. And then for the duet, similarly at the end, you know, it was as you said, it was written by all of us, which again was a really, I guess, comforting and made me feel really kind of secure, because it was my first time. You know, I really didn't want to kind of come in and say I have all the answers, because I really didn't. You know, I just had kind of starts of ideas, and it was kind of the whole team which kind of brought them all together, which was really nice.
Yeah, great. Lovely.
It's really lovely to hear both of you talk about musical theatre as an art form, because you're both clearly so passionate about it, and you've both obviously been involved in 10-minute musicals for a few years now, and Circles of the Moon has been performed in Hornchurch at Queen's Theatre, Pontio Bangor, Focus Festival at Wales. Is it Focus Festival? Is that what it's called?
Focus Wales, yeah. Focus Wales.
Focus Wales in Wrexham, Aberystwyth Arts Centre. So you have also, between the two of you, come across a lot of the other 10-minute musicals that have been created because of this initiative. So you've obviously both seen that there's a hunger for new musical theatre to be made in Wales. And what do you think needs to happen next in Wales? This is quite a big question, but in order for us to embrace this wave of artists who want to create new musical theatre, but what do you think needs to happen?
We need money.
Yeah, that's one. That's one thing. It's just interesting to kind of pose this question, because I think often we feel that there's not really a musical theatre scene in Wales, but it certainly seems like we're building one.
Can I maybe speak a little more broadly, but in relation to the process that we've been through with 10-minute musicals? When I was coming towards today's conversation, I went back through some of my early notes from the first week where we were creating this piece. The first thing that existed in that week was trust. and the kind of creative crucible concept. There's no rule that we have to come out of this with a musical. There is no expectation that by the third Sunday we have to come out of this with something which is performable. What there is a hope that we will find in that creative process some sparks where we can kind of bring something new creatively into the world without kind of fear, in a way. And our determination to make something happen is a key to that process being successful. So if you just take the two of us and then the four of us and then Angharad and other people who come on board as we go along, including our audiences, I think there is a genuine open-heartedness towards new theatre forms, new theatre collaborations, new theatre environments, and I don't think trying to shoehorn it into the national framework is always necessarily the right way to go. When I was looking at my inspirations and my starting points again, I went back to the page on which I'd written dark musicals, and I tried online various searches to try and find what the phrase dark musical would take me to, and this is just the first sort of 6 or 8 that came up. Each one of them realistically has come from very, very different source material. It's not necessarily come from a sectoral shift or a sectoral dynamic of some kind. So Pink Floyd The Wall came up as a piece of spectacular theatre in which dark themes are touched on. Street Scene, Kurt Weill, obviously, with Kurt Weill's situation historically and the time period in which he was writing. Sweeney Todd came up, Miss Saigon came up, Repo, the genetic opera, not one I'm particularly familiar with, but it came up as part of that kind of search. Jekyll and Hyde came up as well. And in all of those, or The Nightmare Before Christmas, of course, again, which is a kind of confection of darkness. All of those things come from different inspirations within the literary canon or the theatrical canon. And somebody somewhere, often for commercial reasons, has seen that if we put these graphics, this kind of dark comic book image together with this music, that we'll create something which people will pay for. And the culture that we come out of is very different to that. We come out of something which is more interested in the investment in the art, investment in the artists, in the art form, doing something for our communities, making all those things match up and link up. So I think it's very difficult for us to use the term musical theatre at times because it is so connected in the national cultural picture to commercial outcomes and commercial, eventually what is a commercial product. It's a musical 3-dimensional form of theatre, which is the equivalent of a Mars bar in many cases.
Yeah.
It's somebody selling a product. And we tend to come at it from a different way. So I think part of our problem is that we have to find ways to educate the way funding works, not necessarily individuals, but educate the process. Musical theatre is an extraordinary multidisciplinary art form, absolutely extraordinary, and it deeply affects its audiences. So finding a path for that material to exist on is a tough one. I don't underestimate that. So yeah. I don't think I have an easy answer.
Yeah, no, this is the perfect answer, really. And I've been really lucky, the Arts Council, they exist in such a, again, coming back to the shackled kind of culture that we're in at the moment, but they were trusting with this this whole project, really, in that I'm such a believer in that the movement should precede the form, but actually we're asked backwards, we're the other way around. So the structures come first, and then somehow we as artists have to maneuver ourselves through that structure. So I guess what this project has been trying to do, and Luke and I have had this discussion, people going, but what's happening with the 10-minute musicals?
Absolutely.
It's it is more of I don't want to say underground, because it's not, I'm not a guerrilla artist, but that it exists and it will shapeshift itself. That's what it is. That's the beauty of it.
We talk a lot in the intro episode, Angharad and I, about how there's so much pressure for there to be something, whatever that is, like a finished product, as it were, and we try and take that away in 10-minute musicals. But it's interesting. I think these conversations around what is a musical, what does musical theatre actually mean, are really interesting for the broader landscape of the arts. I think that's just a really interesting conversation to have, and I think an important one.
Especially moving forward, the political landscape that we're in now, what we could be doing with this art form could be really exciting. And
not what we've seen before necessarily.
Yeah, but it's up to for I guess people like myself and everybody in this room now to create those platforms, or those spaces to be able to maneuver that through that, and that's the challenge, is setting up those spaces, because the artists can do it themselves.
Yeah.
Can I just go back to the original kind of development of the inspiration in the workshop side of things, because we talked about the practical things, like the triggers, like the images and the objects, but there was something that when we looked at that plague mask, we one of the areas that we talked about was people being trapped in mental health circumstances which made life extremely difficult for them and the people around them. When you go back to look at that plague mask from a mental health point of view, rather than social constructs such as a plague, it's an incredibly powerful way of thinking about the character who is inside that mask, and that person is feeling trapped. And these come from notes that we made at the time. And I think one of my problems with the 10-minute musical form is that whenever I writing for the screen, writing for circus, writing for theatre, musical theatre, I'm a theatre maker as well as a writer. So I'm always considering the three-dimensional, the multi-dimensional aspect of the writing. So you can write in something which is going to become your sound effect or your visual image or whatever. So what I think 10-minute musicals misses, and it's unfortunate that it does, is especially for some of the newer writers who might not be thinking this way, it misses the opportunity, because it doesn't yet exist. It misses the opportunity to write that multidimensional art form. So I write for costume, I write for staging, I write for entrances and exits. I write for levels, I write for extremely powerful poetic images that are delivered through design and through lighting and so on. And one of the absolute kind of dire nature of things to do with Zoom readings and Zoom things over the last 4 or 5 months is the complete denial of the existence of design and the denial of the existence of lighting and sound effects and soundscapes and choreography, movement, shape, all of those different things that we take completely for granted as theatre makers. That's a great sadness about the last 4 or 5 months, is that people are being introduced to things just through the words and the characterization, really. That's where it came from.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, because we obviously, as part of our podcast series, are introducing a design element in each episode. So I wonder if this might be a good time to welcome theatre designer Corey Shipp to the conversation. How are you doing, Corey?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not so bad. So Corey has been working on the 10-minute musicals project for the last few weeks and has come up with initial design responses to each musical. So we're just going to share with Matthew and Peter those design responses. Should we dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So yeah, first of all, thank you, Peter, for like recognizing that designers are just totally being left out of the Zoom lockdown conversation. It's been like a real bone of contention amongst myself and others. So I want to like thank you for acknowledging that. And obviously, Harrod has breached that slightly by being able to bring me into this project, which is great. I found this musical really quite captivating, very much along Matthew's sort of lines of I'm very done with the jazz hands sort of theatre that's not using theatre in the art form that I think it should be, and challenging what we think and exploring the darker, sort of tones of things that we go through. It all seems to be this thing that we go along and enjoy and then walk away from and go, ah, that was nice. Which I can't stand. I would much rather see theatre challenging what we think we understand and what we think we know and what we don't want to talk about. So I found this whole musical piece for me really super inspiring. I fell quite quickly into the fashion photography work of Tim Walker, which you'll see quite a lot in this mood board, very much clashing these ideas of what we expect one art form to be and subverting it. So you get a lot of Tim Walker's work plays with scale or puts people in situations that you wouldn't expect to see in a fashion editorial. So I found that really quickly. You'll see at least 3 images here that are Tim Walker, which all sort of work on this black and white tonal quality, which I absolutely fell into and just thought there was something really interesting in getting that sort of real sort of plain black and white narrative against this backdrop that's completely not that. You'll also see Cornelia Parker in the top left corner, who exploded from the Tate, which again comes up in most designers' sketchbooks at least once or twice somewhere throughout their history. She's a real visionary, and I think there's something really interesting in that thing of having an image that you think is one thing, and then when you blow it apart, those shadows create something else, and subverting that. So I thought it would be really interesting to play with illusion and abstraction in this, and what exactly that means when you take that outside and you can't control with light becomes really, really tricky. But as always, these are very super initial responses without location-based sort of issues to deal with. It's all part of the fun when you haven't got any limitations just yet. And you'll also see that I looked at shadow work in the bottom right-hand corner of having screens and something, so that we're able to divide the space up quite nicely, possibly, and to really play with this idea of audience thinking, oh, look, there's a person's shadow, and perhaps when you move a torch from one way to the other, you get this different projection of something. I mean, this musical is, again, using musical as a really broad term, is one that I feel like you could kind of strip it apart and do it 20 different ways, which is what I think is really interesting about it. And it's so powerful. And the vocals in that recording are just so strong. It's almost creating a space for that to take power rather than have your design take power, I think. I mean, you're very welcome to disagree or to chip in. But for me, it was more about giving a space to those characters and to that vocal rather than overloading it with detail we don't necessarily need, I don't think. But I'd be really interested to work with sort of maybe scale or that black and white narrative that feels like they're opposites working against each other but also working together, possibly. It was a really good one. I really enjoyed this one.
I'm really interested in, Matthew, your initial response to this, because obviously as a director you're used to working with designers at this early stage. So kind of how is it looking at a piece that you've written or that you've co-written and seeing an initial design response to it? I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I love designers so much, so much so that I've set up a company with one. And and to echo kind of what you're saying, Corey and Peter as well, I think this is such a clear example of why designers are just so needed right now, especially in a time where we're going to have to completely rethink how we make theatre in spaces. And I think, aside from the conversation I will have about your mood board, Corey, which looks fantastic, people should be supporting designers in this situation because they're the ones who will have the keys. But yeah, I mean, everything you're saying, Corey, I totally agree with. I think for us that I'll start with the colour first, just because I think that's such a good choice. I think we were always really interested in these two people being opposites, but as you said, kind of have this kind of moment of meeting and a moment of kind of working together. So I really like you know, the thing of black and white, initially saying that these people are complete polar opposites and that they don't work together, but then, you know, just that's brilliant. For us, which is really good, the idea that the River Styx is kind of the place where this musical takes place, and that actually that, you know, the River Styx does kind of exist. If it were to exist, it exists throughout time, that it's kind of something which is both existing, you know, in Greek mythology, but also is existing now. And that as a director, I guess my instinct would always be to follow what you're saying, Corey, and to make the space actually as minimal as possible, because for us to be able to transport through time and to kind of try and reference all these different cultures and reference all these different kind of, I guess, environments and atmospheres, to try and actually replicate that with detail feels really messy. And actually there's something way more, I don't know, yeah, something way more, the word has escaped me, but yeah, there's something which feels really, really nice and just, I guess, composed and stylish about that, of just, you know, concentrating. But then even, you know, you see using the silhouettes and stuff, there's quite a few lyrics within the songs which talk about shadows, and the idea that, you know, you have something like the image of a boat sailing across the sea, which initially is quite a simple image, and then, you know, like the iceberg, you look below and it's kind of all of these different people throughout history and all of these different details, which, you know, the idea that one image looks like something and then you explode in something else is also brilliant. Yeah, I think it looks great. Looks
it feels
absolutely
like
great.
it's one of those shows that wants, you know, you see the really a sort of minimalistic design that I think unfortunately the landscape has lost slightly. We used to see work in the 80s that was big blank, you know, expanses and really clear crystal concepts that didn't have any sort of extra fluff, and I think we've lost so much of that, and this piece feels like it belongs in that world more than this sort of fluffy, nasty, tactile world that designers, sometimes myself included, seem to go to at the moment, because it seems to be that theatrical trend, whereas you look at the really big, massive, expanse opera spaces and go, ooh, that's more interesting for this, I think, to have that big vacuous space that fills everything
and trusting the audience's imagination, right? I think that's and similar to you, Corey, like I've also worked on shows where I should have trusted that more.
Yeah.
And actually that is the most powerful tool you have in the room, is the audience's imagination, and having a space where the material can, as you know, as you said, the music and the words can just take the forefront, and then and the audience then fill in all of the amazing kind of imagery which Peter's written with their minds in this kind of really, I think as well, what's great actually about you talking about it being minimal is that it also gives you expanse, and I think that's the thing which the story feels really expansive, and any kind of design which could feel like there's no limits to, I think is one which would excite me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, we're so visually literate at the moment, aren't we? And maybe more so now because of these screens that we're watching constantly. So to try and divert the audience's attention a little bit, you know, towards those musical narratives, and actually what the musicianship and the breadth of musicianship, how that can actually open our minds rather than having this visual stimulus constantly, you know.
And I think what happens then is any stimulus that you decide you want to put in all of a sudden has so much more weight because you've had nothing for so long. So if all of a sudden you wanted to have a spattering of colour across what previously has been, you know, sort of really navy grey, then all of a sudden that says so much more than if there'd been more colour to start with. It's got much more power. And I think that's, for this piece, I think that's really interesting to explore.
Can I just come in? Hi Corey, we've never actually met, and it's really nice to meet you even though we're in these strange circumstances, and also to see your work. Can I ask you just a little bit more about the center image on the bottom row, which is a bit more difficult to read?
I think that one for me is very much a colour palette rather than an image of what, you know, there's no reason why there would need to be eggs in your show at all. But there's something in that not black, not white and not grey colour that I think is really interesting. And whether that's just because it's somewhere in the middle of the two, or whether there's just a cold edge to that colour that I think is really really interesting to play with, but certainly not so much the birds and the eggs, definitely the colour tone.
Okay. I would just say also for me as a theatre maker that one of the most exciting moments in the process of making theatre for me is the day that the model box arrives, and you all sit there and look at it and just think, wow, you have that moment of transition from words on paper, notes on scores, etc., and suddenly you're in a place where you can conceptualize and visualize very, very differently, and begin to really develop a sense of how your audience will receive this thing as well. So I completely agree with everything that Matthew said. I think the tones, the contrasts and so on that you found, I like the concept of the shadow work as well. One of the things that, again, 10-minute musicals can't do is it can't give you the kind of transitions that you need to sustain an audience for 2 hours. So you can't get the big transitions of tone where you get, release of tension. There's a lot of tension in our 10 minutes, which dramatic tension, which is fantastic. But you also, to sustain the audience's commitment across the 2 hours, we will need to be able to build in those changes, build in the pace changes, the rhythm changes, the texture, the characterization, the humor, all those releases that you have to be able to bring in to keep the dramatic tension rising in a rising arc towards your climax. So obviously design feeds into that, score feeds into that, choreography feeds into that as well. And I think it's exactly what you're saying there about sudden splash of color, sudden change of texture, or the way lighting creates shadow in a new way. That kind of thing would absolutely build into that. But lovely, thank you very much for what you've put together.
No, not at all. It was an enjoyable one, this one. I thought it was really, really something I could get my teeth into.
Thank you so much, Corey, for sharing your design responses for Circles of the Moon. If you are joining us on a non-visual medium today and you want to see the design responses for yourself, you can catch this episode on YouTube.
So we set Matthew and Peter another challenge of trying to condense their 10-minute musical into 3 minutes. And as we have with the others, we were working with the MA-MT students at Welsh College of Music and Drama. So we're just going to have a listen and a look at how they responded to the piece. And this is the first time you've seen this, I think, Matt and Peter, so hope you enjoy.
Collector of bones, collector of skulls, collector of souls. We begin. Shadows of the labyrinth. Ghost warriors of King Hurler. Call up the huntsman. Call up the hounds.
Tonight we face the foulest of storms.
Of the brave
and the children of blood,
the shamed
and the maimed.
Call up the disgraced and the disfigured.
Collector of bones, collector of skulls. Voices from the darkness.
Save me, please, save me.
The hunt begins. Boatman. Boatman.
Here.
Tell me. To the south.
A river of darkness and night.
To the east and to the west.
Winged angels of fire and light.
to the north.
Whirlpools of screaming and grief.
Boatmen,
Here, ready to be swamped by the surging.
stand strong.
Standing strong,
Hold hard.
tormented by the raging.
Hold hard.
Skin stripped by the burning.
Stand strong.
Deluged by the drowning.
The hunt begins.
Standing strong. No choice. No choice.
Great. Yeah, it's beautiful. I think what I don't know, I'm going to come in because I think what this gives us, because we worked with Joe Hood, so what this gives us is just a little bit more of the narrative of musically where this could you know, arrangement wise, where this could head as well. So I don't know if that was useful for you in particular, Matt. And I know you worked a little bit with Joe, and so I just hope it's brought that to life a little bit more for you, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I'd always kind of, well, myself and Peter had always imagined that there was definitely a choral element, which we hadn't been able to explore yet. And so being able to experiment with having lots of different voices to kind of come in to that section, I think, yeah, it was definitely, was really useful. And yeah, and definitely works. I think there's definitely, that's the kind of, feels like a really good starting point for what that whole kind of section and part of the story could be. So yeah, really, really impressed by that.
I think that what's interesting, if you think about theatre and semiotics, the whole language of what we create for audiences begins a long time before the show, and using the Gustave Doré, the Goya, those images in this context, I think is a really good choice, a really powerful choice. If we were doing the show in, you know, X theatre in Y city, the expectation of seeing those images on the stage would be minimal, but the expectation of perhaps seeing them in the program would be very high, because somebody would be creating dramaturgical story line notes to give the context for the history of some of these things. But you also might find it in the poster images. So Martin Esslin, in talking about the whole framing device of theatre, talks a lot about the way the audience starts understanding, reading, experiencing a show a long time before they actually see it. A great example of that is Don't Cry For Me, Argentina, you know, which is released as a pop single 2 years before the musical hits the stage. So when the audience finally come to that musical, they have got a breadth of understanding. Even if it's inaccurate, it's something which is tuning them in along the way.
Absolutely. And I think this is what this project is trying to do, and especially this podcast, and why we decided to work with the students really is that, you know, we have become consumers, haven't we, of this stuff, rather than, again, this lived through experience that you can tread the waters with the writers, with the composers, you know, that we are capable as consumers to do that as well, you know. So when you come to sit in that auditorium, it's such a visceral experience that you can be grounded in, rather than a consumer of this material constantly. I mean, that's a huge shift, I know, and that's going to take a lot of money as well, you know, and governmental kind of belief in what the arts can achieve. You know, it's don't know if we'll ever achieve it in my lifetime anyway, but yeah, this project is a little nod to that then.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Peter Cox and Matthew Holmquist, for joining us. I also just want to say a big thank you to Kellen Cartwright and Erin Claire Spence, who performed Circles of the Moon, and to musical director Joe Hood.
Thank you also to Corey Shipp and your design responses. If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to spread the word on social media, you can do so using the hashtag Leeway10pod and tagging us at Leeway Prods on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook.
And of course, we can't sign off today without saying a big thank you to you, our listeners. Join us next time for more exclusive interviews with artists from Leeway Productions' 10-Minute Musicals Initiative. I'm Luke Hereford.
I am Angharad Lee.
We've been your hosts.